Just about 20 minutes after the hour of 7 o'clock. Welcome back to the Now Morning Show on this Tuesday morning. Now, the Caribbean Supermarket Association has joined the conversation on food security for the region by launching a practical and on-the-ground initiative. Here to tell us more about this is President of the Supermarkets Association, Mr. Rajiv Dipti. Mr. Dipti, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us on Now.
Good morning, Kimberly. Good morning to the Now Morning Show team, Rokas and Co. And good morning, Trinidad and Tobago.
Of course. Now, the Caribbean Supermarkets Association. Is it that you would have founded this association? And just tell us a little bit more about this.
Yeah, certainly, Kimberly. So, let me provide some background. Over the last 4 years, actually, when I was first installed as president of the Supermarket Association of Trinidad and Tobago, I made it my business to go backward into the value chain to try to get an appreciation of why it is our local farmers have such a challenge with getting produce onto the shelves. To do this, I met with various farmers groups. I met with NAMDEVCO. I tried to get an appreciation of the farmers markets and the machinery in place that the Ministry of Agriculture, Lands and Fisheries has across the various farmers markets. And in doing so, I was able to get an appreciation that the challenges of production, the basic fundamentals, and the basic challenges were issues such as land tenure, predial larceny, economies of scale, all provided, and not least having the investment and the capital and the expenditure available to local farmers where these challenges are put in place. Of course, this is what really feeds into the narrative why imported food is so much cheaper, why imported food, close to 90% of what you would see in the supermarkets are imported. And, then we had this situation with COVID, and then we had this situation with the war in Ukraine. And then we had this situation where our leaders now come together across the region to say that, listen, food security is going to be the biggest ticket in 2022. We're really feeling it right now with the cost of shipping, the cost of freight, and we're going to be looking to our neighbors that have arable lands and where we can decrease the factors involved in the cost of production, the cost of shipping, and also work on the basics. So when these things came together, I got together with some of the same players. I spoke with Mrs. Nirmala Devi Singh. She's the CEO of NAMDEVCO. Professor Marlon Knights of the University of Trinidad and Tobago. Try to understand the practicalities involved in these processes, because the very simple idea of if we as a nation are going to Guyana to plant the land, then we're going to need to find market for that. And it's not just about production. It's about getting involved in the agri-processing sector. And we realized that there needed to be a strong private sector trust to really ensure that the production is done correctly, that the processing, the packaging, the standardization, and getting involved in the value chain activities could be better, not just for consumers, but also because they needed to end up in supermarkets, and supermarkets need to be involved in the awareness campaigns, especially when we see not just from the role of carbohydrate food security and other sectors such as the dairy sector, the meat sector. We really want consumers to now be involved in the consumption of better nutritional profile products, and
Of
that's
course.
something
Now,
we've
Mr.
seen.
Dipti, of course, but I was just wondering. So tell me basically when was the association launched, and also what is the first process? Because you'd have mentioned the agri-processing factor of this entire project. So when was it launched, and what's the first step to getting that agri-processing sector off the ground?
The launch took place formally last week. The inception of the association was August 2022. The launch took place last week with an interim management team whose mission now is really to get involved with partners in the islands, the various islands. We've been in communication with persons and companies in Barbados and Guyana, and it's really about the role of this association, Kimberly, is really to augment government efforts where food security is concerned. Because we've seen our governments take a proactive role, we're here to say that we're here to support that. So our next steps would be to really get involved in some interactive missions across the various islands and take the conversations that we've already had even further.
Nice. Okay. And so I know you would have mentioned Guyana as being one of the countries that you want to go to. How important is it to almost strike while the iron is hot in Guyana right now as it relates to what the government also wants to achieve?
Well, that Guyana is a critical part of the inception of the Caribbean Supermarket Association because we would have seen our own Prime Minister sign a memorandum of understanding, our nation, sorry, sign a memorandum of understanding with Guyana, and then we would have seen President Irfan Ali here and his message that food security is very critical. So let's put things now in perspective. Is it now that those conversations have been had? Is it that the Guyanese government is going to give land tenure for these things? Are they going to support these projects? Is our nation going to support these projects? We're here to really get involved with that. We're auxiliary to the food security effort, but very critical to its success as well, Kimberly.
Of course. Now, in terms of the Caribbean Supermarket Association, can you share exactly, is it that all the supermarkets locally have bought into this idea of regional food security, or is it that you're just going to be partnering with those state agencies such as NAMDEFCO and, of course, the private investors as well?
Well, just to put it in perspective, Kimberly, the idea of a Caribbean Supermarket Association has not been a new one. We've seen the manufacturers and the agribusiness association as well launch Caribbean initiatives. The idea when we've had, to answer your first question, all members of the Supermarket Association of Trinidad and Tobago are automatically eligible to be involved in this. Obviously, we would have had the conversations within our own sector, so they're willing to step it up. However, we really and truly, this is not so much about retailers, but about food security, as I mentioned. That really is the mission of the Caribbean Supermarket Association, because that's the big topic on the table today. It's the big elephant in the room. So that if we're going to be dealing with food security, you're very correct. We're going to have to be dealing with a lot of inter-island state agencies to have the conversations about how exactly we move forward.
Right. And I'm just wondering about the supermarkets' involvement in the entire process. So you said it's not about the retailers, but is it that, for example, our local items may be on the shelves in Guyana and their local items? Like, how exactly is it going to work to
Yeah,
promote that regional food security?
Yeah, you're absolutely correct, Kimberly. That there's totally the ability now for increased inter-island trading, and that's something that's been taking place already, I should say, and it's going to be something that we're driving organically and inorganically by pushing the products between distribution. We have lots of companies inside Trinidad and Tobago that already do that. But there's also going to be the opportunity for other Caribbean islands to get a showcase for their products here. And that's something, when you see governments talk about removing the tariffs, removing barriers to trade, it's something that's going to stimulate very naturally the trading between islands, especially if you get that ferry service up and running. I think you're going to see the potential for that trade to blossom.
Of course. What about consumer buy-in? Do you see a need to have actual consumers buy into the association and maybe the benefits and opportunities it can give to us locally?
So, Kimberly, when we talk about consumers, they really are not today for tomorrow. You have to work on them over a period of time, and we have to constantly keep aligning them with the new realities in consumer trends. So, for sure, we've been working on consumers prior to this. We're going to be working on consumers, and what we really see right now, especially in supermarkets, is that we see a very price sensitive consumer. They're very deal oriented. They always go for all these specials, all the deals, all the promotions that we put out for them. And it's something that once these products come in the same profile and once the price point is good for the consumers, only then, even when we push alternative products, like with the different kinds of flour, for example, you still have to make sure that the price point is good, the packaging is good, the presentation, and it's appealing to them. Today's consumer has a lot of choice and a lot of options, so it's a very competitive marketplace, Kimberly.
Course. And in terms of these specific items that you want for that interregional trade, have you identified whether it's going to be crops, whether it's going to be products? I mean, how has the
Yeah.
conversation been going?
Yeah, sure. Kimberly, we are not trying to replace imported goods or the profile of imported goods. You can't do that because we're an import-dependent nation who imports close to 90% of what we consume, and there's a lot of reasons for that. However, within the Caribbean, I think, for example, we could do more to ensure our carbohydrate food security by focusing on root crops. I think that we need to do that. I think that CARICOM has set a 25% reduction mandate in the import bill by 2025. So if they're very serious about doing that, then they're going to have to be focusing on staples like grains and corn. And I think that those are big ticket items which are huge for the inputs of production. And you could look at, for example, in Guyana, and if you were to really get serious about that, then you'll see so much potential for our local manufacturers, for example, to benefit. I've seen the Caribbean Manufacturing Association is also keenly strong on this. So it's this idea of working together with other bodies, other governments, other islands to really make these realities come true, Kimberly.
Of course. Now, I know that you would have mentioned, of course, agri processing, but one of the key things in the recently held Agri Investment Forum was that issue of technology and how we can leverage technology to improve the agriculture sector. Has that conversation also been taking place at the association?
Oh yeah, Kimberly, for sure. Listen, what governments bring to the table, they bring the lands, they bring the incentives, they bring those things. What you get from the private sector is the capital, the investment, and the trust to really push towards consumers. I've seen Novo Farms, for example, do amazing things with the freeze dry. I think things like dal, kalaloo, the choker, and you just add the hot water. So that's also very capital intensive. You see what Berry Cove is doing in Tobago with what they're doing with berries is also very capital intensive, but it's going to be creating import substitution and also be a foreign exchange earner. So I think that when we look at the common thread of all these things, Kimberly, what you're seeing is there's capital investment and there's support by the state. And I think that when you go across CARICOM, that's what you need to see from every player in every island.
Of course. And then finally, what are some of the most effective interventions should be made to leverage the existing capabilities and actually capacities that we have here locally as it relates to the food producers and the packagers in the island?
I think Trinidad and Tobago is such a hotbed of innovation. We are leaders in the Caribbean. We are the nerve center of the Caribbean. And regardless of where our position is today in the scheme of things in the Caribbean, we are always being looked to as a leading light for the other islands to follow. And I think that where we lend our support to these initiatives, and I would have been extremely heartened to see our Prime Minister and the Prime Minister of Guyana, say things in common that really, give us the impetus to launch things like the Caribbean Supermarket Association, because this would not have happened if our leaders had not really put in place the narrative that, listen, we're prepared to take it seriously. Because for a lot of years, Kimberly, we've had people in Trinidad and Tobago saying that we're never going to get really serious about food security. But I feel that very strongly that we are going to be doing something as long as we have the support of the state.
Nice. Well, Mr. Dipty, it's always a pleasure to have you here on the Now Morning Show. Thank you so much for joining us. And of course, all the best with the new association.
Thank you, Kimberly. All the best to the Now Morning Show team. All the best, Trinidad and Tobago. Take care.
And that was the founder of the Caribbean Supermarkets Association and, of course, president of the Supermarkets Association, Mr. Rajiv Dipty, just sharing the new initiative and how we can ensure food security across the region. You're on the Now Morning Show. Up next, we have Shamla with Unique Not Different. Stay with us.